Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about Chapter 8, Attitude Change and Interactive Communications. There are 6 learning objectives in this chapter. We'll start by talking about the traditional communications model and the components marketers must understand to change consumers' attitudes towards their products and services, and how the consumer is no longer the passive receiver of information marketers once believed them to be. We'll also talk about the source delivering the marketing message and how important their credibility and attractiveness can be. We'll also talk about the marketing message itself and how important the structure of the message is in determining how persuasive it will be. We'll finish up the chapter by talking about the Elaboration Likelihood Model, or ELM, and how audience characteristics like level of involvement help determine whether the nature of the source or the message itself will be relatively more persuasive. So how do marketers persuade consumers to change their minds or comply with a request? Well, reciprocity is a powerful tool. People are more likely to give if they've received something first. For example, offering monetary incentives for respondents to complete surveys increases response rates an average of 65%. Authority is also important. Who delivers the message? We tend to believe an authoritative source much more readily. For example, a credible news source like CBC carries more weight than a celebrity gossip program like TMZ. Another technique is scarcity. Items are more attractive when they're less available. For example, in a chocolate chip cookie study, respondents who only got 2 cookies liked them better than those that got 10. And people don't like to contradict themselves. They like consistency. For example, in one study, neighborhood respondents were asked to sign a petition in support of people with disabilities, and then asked for donations 2 weeks later. People who signed were more likely to donate. In fact, this technique doubled the donations usually received. This is a great example of the lowball technique, asking for a small request and then a larger request. People also have a tendency to conform, a desire to fit in. This is referred to as consensus. For example, some studies show that people are more likely to donate to a cause if they see a list of neighbors who have already donated. Before marketers craft a message to persuade, some basic questions have to be answered. Maybe we're trying to persuade consumers to purchase a new fragrance, for example. Who will be the source of the message? A celebrity? A career woman? Or maybe a rock star? How should the message be constructed? Will it emphasize the negative consequences of selecting the wrong perfume? Or make comparisons to another fragrance? What media will be used to transmit the message? Will we use print, like newspapers or magazines? Broadcast, like TV or radio? Outdoor or social media? What target market characteristics will influence the ad's acceptance? Maybe frustration with daily life. Perhaps a fantasy appeal of a frustrated housewife being swept off her feet by her knight in shining armor could be used. So how do marketers communicate with consumers? The traditional communications model was developed to understand mass communications. It describes the process of transferring information before a sale. The message is perishable, so it must be repeated a number of times before it's replaced by another campaign. The model assumes that the receiver is passive, like a couch potato, being fed with information to persuade them to act. The process begins with the source choosing and encoding a message, perhaps an ad, a coupon, a press release, or maybe a store display. The message must then be transmitted via some media, for example, TV, magazines, billboards, or even a t-shirt. The message is then later decoded by the receiver. Feedback is received by the source, who uses consumers' reactions to modify the message. This could be based on sales or maybe marketing research. Although the traditional communications model isn't completely wrong, it doesn't tell the whole story. Consumers have many more choices available today and greater control to process the messages. For example, there are hundreds of TV channels to choose from, remote controls to change channels, PVRs or personal video recorders to pre-record shows and skip commercials, video on demand to avoid commercials altogether, and caller ID to avoid telephone solicitations. And today, permission marketing gives consumers a voice to decide which messages to see and when, like opt-in email, for example. The good news for marketers is that they may be more successful in persuading consumers who have agreed to let them try. Social media also now allows for a more interactive relationship. For example, Facebook pages like Tim Hortons allow consumers to post comments or photos, to like Timmy's, and follow the company on Twitter to stay on top of the latest products and promotions, for example. Consumers aren't just buying products anymore either, they're helping to create them. Consumer co-creation is when consumers interact with marketers to influence a product, a service, or an outcome that's created. For example, a company selling a baby stretch mark reducing cream did some research to find out why product sales were soaring at department store beauty counters. They found out that 75% of their consumers were using it as a facial wrinkle cream. Based on consumer feedback, they launched a new advertising slogan saying, "Better than Botox." This is a great example of consumer co-creation. Another example is Jones Soda, who gets label and flavor ideas from consumers like chocolate fudge, green apple, and whoop-ass. Consumers also came up with the idea of deep thoughts under bottle caps, like 76.4% of all stats are meaningless. Jones Soda website also allows consumers to interact with the brand by designing their own bottle labels, posting Instagram photos, and entering online contests. Overall, consumers are playing a much more proactive role in communications, becoming partners rather than couch potatoes. Many are not sitting at home waiting for marketers to communicate with them on TV or in the paper. They're seeking out information. They have control over their media environment with remotes and PVRs and hundreds of channels to choose from. And they're providing input to help shape messages they and others like them receive. There are many new exciting alternatives to traditional mass advertising like TV, radio, and print. Marketers are using mobile commerce to promote goods and services on smartphones and tablets. For example, Apple Pay allows consumers to easily pay with their debit or credit cards with just a touch of their phone, and moviegoers can compete for prizes playing Time Play at Cineplex theaters. Coke partnered with Google to buy the world a Coke from their computer or phone and connect with someone on the other side of the world. Users selected a location, attached a text or video, and then watched as the Coke was delivered to a specially designed vending machine on the other side of the world. Receivers could then send a thank you message right from the vending machine. Social media allows consumers to create and share content with people all over the world. Companies and consumers are blogging, video blogging, or podcasting, and millions of consumers are subscribing to virtual worlds like Warcraft and Second Life, where you can actually purchase virtual products like clothing and shoes. And there are almost 2 billion active users on Facebook. Social media offers many alternatives for marketers to communicate with their consumers. The ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, which asks people to take a selfie or a video of themselves being doused with a bucket of ice water, went viral on the internet, raising over $115 million for ALS research. The slight amount of sacrifice involved explains part of the campaign's success. Research shows that people tend to donate more money when they have to suffer a bit for the cause. Researchers call this the martyrdom effect. Early perspectives on marketing communications looked at feedback primarily in terms of behavior. Did the consumer buy the product after they saw the ad? But response is more than just buying. It may involve building brand awareness or a long-term relationship with the consumer. Response can be thought of in terms of the first-order response and the second-order response. A first-order response involves an offer that directly produces a transaction. For example, when a customer sees a TV infomercial and calls in to place an order. A second-order response involves consumer feedback, but doesn't result in a transaction, but it's still an important component of interactive marketing. For example, a request for information, or a request to join a mailing list, a referral of a friend, or comments made in social media can have a big impact on brand image. The Persuasion Knowledge Model, or PKM model, suggests that consumers develop knowledge about persuasion and use it to cope with persuasive attempts. An exchange between a customer and a persuasion agent, like a salesperson, is a two-way interaction, and both have their goals. Not only are consumers more interactive, they're smarter. They know a thing or two about persuasion, actually 3 things. They know about the purchase topic, a little about the sales agents and their motives, and the persuasion techniques that they use. For example, a consumer shopping for a TV has probably done some online research, knows about commissioned salespeople, and expects some sales tactics to be used. Perhaps that offer for the extended warranty, for example. Some recent tactics used by marketers include sock puppeting and paid influencer programs. Sock puppeting involves a company executive or a biased source posing as someone else, touting the benefits of his organization or business in social media. For example, John Mackey, the CEO for Whole Foods, was caught posting messages slamming the competition without revealing his true identity. Paid influencer programs may attempt to start online conversations about brands by encouraging bloggers to write about them. For example, Mercedes gave a blogger an SUV for the weekend if they agreed to blog about it. Let's talk a bit more about the communications model, starting with the source and then the message. The source of the marketing message can be very important. The same word said by different people can have very different meanings. The source is often a spokesperson in an ad. They're often chosen because they're an expert or famous, attractive, or maybe a typical consumer. So what makes a good source? Well, credibility tends to sway internally directed people, and attractiveness tends to sway externally directed people who are more concerned about social acceptance. However, the best choice for the source may depend on the product. Experts are often used for utilitarian products, for example, a vacuum cleaner. Famous or attractive people are often used for products that involve higher social risk, for example, jewelry or fashion clothing. And a typical customer who is likable and trustworthy may be used for everyday products, like cookies or home-baked goods. A credible source can help build the credibility of our product, service, or brand. Credibility is the source's perceived expertise, their objectivity or trustworthiness. For example, perceived sincerity would be really important for a spokesperson for corporate social responsibility. Celebrity endorsers are widely used to generate credibility. Announcements of celebrity endorsement contracts are often used by analysts to evaluate a firm's potential profitability. And ads with celebrity endorsers in them produce almost 10% more readership than those without. A credible source is most persuasive when no opinion has been formed about the product. Even an obnoxious source can still be effective, according to the research. In time, people tend to forget about the negative source and change their attitude anyway. The ads seem to become more persuasive over time rather than less so. This delayed persuasion is known as the sleeper effect. For example, many people find the Spence Diamonds radio ads quite irritating, yet many still shop there. Perhaps this is an example of the sleeper effect. As spokesperson Sean Jones says, "You hate the ads, but you love the stores." If the source appears to be biased, this can negatively affect consumers' attitudes towards the product. For example, the source's information may not be accurate, causing a knowledge bias. Or the source may be perceived to be a hired gun who's just being paid to use the product. This would be an example of a reporting bias. Many marketers spend a lot of money to create marketing messages to convince people that their product is the best. What's interesting is that the more involved a company appears to be, the less credible the message becomes. This is known as the corporate paradox. This sounds similar to the involvement paradox in Chapter 7, but it's something else. Companies can end up generating a lot of hype rather than buzz. Hype is associated with advertising. Consumers perceive it as overt, corporate, and fake. It also generates a lot of skepticism. On the other hand, buzz is associated with word of mouth. It seems covert, grassroots, authentic, and credible. So how do marketers create buzz? Some companies run stealth campaigns, creating buzz by implying that they had nothing to do with it. For example, Dodge Ram Truck created a website supposedly generated by fans, including amateur shots of drag races where the Dodge always wins. They also sent bogus letters to local newspapers protesting increased street racing. Other companies write bogus press reports or bogus consumer reviews online. Another tactic is known as swarming the web. It's a type of paid influencer program. For example, RCA hired young people to pose as fans to help build hype about one of Christina Aguilera's albums on teenage websites like Alloy.com and Girl.com. How attractive the source of the message is also important, not just their physical appearance, but their perceived social value, like their personality or their social status. For example, the Picasso family licensed their name to the French automaker Citroën, and the great-grandson of the famous artist Renoir used his family name and his grandfather's artwork to market bottled water. Sometimes we're more likely to listen to people who are similar to us, for example, for everyday purchases, like household cleaning products or baking products. Celebrities are often used as an attractive source, but they're not always willing to act as a spokesperson for just any brand. However, sometimes they'll endorse a brand as long as it's not aired at home. For example, celebrities like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Brad Pitt, and George Clooney have all done ads for products in Japan that will never be aired in North America, likely for very large sums of money. You might find some of these ads on the internet. This practice has been called Japandering. So, is what is beautiful good? Beautiful people are always trying to persuade us to buy or do something. Research shows there's a halo effect. People who rank higher in one dimension are assumed to excel in others. For example, good-looking people are thought to be smarter, cooler, and happier. And we've already talked about how good-looking men tend to make more money than average-looking men. This relates to the consistency principle. A physically attractive source tends to lead to attitude change, impacting product evaluations and purchase intentions. Maybe people come to associate a particular fragrance with a beautiful celebrity, for example. Consumers direct their attention to the marketing stimuli, the attractive source. but not necessarily the copy in the ad. Beauty can add credibility to products related to attractiveness or sexuality, but are not as effective with products like coffee, for example. We've talked about how celebrities are often used as communication sources. Famous faces capture attention and are processed more efficiently by the brain. They can be used to enhance company image and brand attributes. For example, retired boxer George Foreman has been used to promote an indoor grill, and Justin Bieber has been used to promote nail polish. Just because a celebrity is famous, though, doesn't mean they're a good fit for a product. The matchup hypothesis states that a celebrity's image and that of the product should be similar. For example, in one research study, Tom Selleck was found to be more effective as an endorser for a luxury car than a computer. Other studies have found that people have found to have more trust in their hairdresser if they're attractive, but not if they're a dentist. When celebrities don't behave, this can create negative associations with a brand. For example, Gillette didn't want the image of a promiscuous man associated with their brand, so they dropped Tiger Woods very quickly. And O.J. Simpson and Martha Stewart are other examples of misbehaving celebrities that have been associated with products and brands. One solution is to use non-human endorsers. You don't have to worry about them checking into rehab. For example, Morty the Bison has been used from Manitoba Telecom Services for the past 10 years. The source of the message is important, but so is the way a marketer structures the message. It determines how persuasive it will be. So what is the most important feature in persuading consumers? Well, in a study of over 1,000 commercials, the most important feature was whether the ad stressed a unique product attribute or benefit, a brand differentiating message or USP, unique selling proposition. The characteristics of the commercial message, how it is said versus what is said, will help determine how impactful the message will be. Marketers have a lot of decisions to make about how the message is communicated. For example, should words or pictures be used? How concrete should the arguments be? And should both sides be presented? Should conclusions be pointed out or left for the consumer to determine? And how often should the ads be repeated? Should direct comparisons to competitors' products be used? And what appeals should be used? For example, sex, humor, or fear. So, what is the best way to send the message? Visually or verbally? Visual images can have a big emotional impact, and a picture is worth 1,000 words. Receivers can chunk information which helps them remember it over time. Verbal messages are great for high involvement situations, like print contexts where readers are motivated to pay attention. For example, when they're reading a magazine or a newspaper. Verbal messages are great for presenting factual information. They're more effective when they're reinforced by a framed picture, a picture that's strongly related to the copy. Verbal messages require more frequent exposures due to decay. For example, radio requires a lot of repetition to be effective. The visual and verbal components of an ad may affect brand attitudes in one of two ways. This is known as the dual component of brand attitudes. For example, what is said in an ad, the verbal component, not only affects consumers' beliefs about the product, but also their attitudes towards the ad. Both may impact how they feel about the brand. The model also points out that the visual component may also affect impressions of the ad, which can affect attitudes towards the brand. What's interesting is that the visual components may also affect beliefs about the product. For example, one study found that a photo of a sunset in a facial tissue magazine ad created the belief that the product was available in many colors. The dual component of brand attitudes emphasizes how important it is for marketers to ensure that the verbal and visual components of an ad are sending the same message. Vividness is also important. More vivid words and phrases are easier to remember, and powerful descriptions and graphics command attention and are strongly embedded in memory. And the more concrete or specific we are, the better. Concrete discussion of product attributes influences their importance by increasing attention. Consider an ad for a water-resistant watch. Which ad message would be more effective? According to industry sources, 3 out of every 4 watch breakdowns are due to water getting into the case. Or, according to industry sources, many watch breakdowns are due to water getting into the case. According to the research, the first message was more effective because the message was more concrete. The word many is more abstract, whereas the phrase 3 out of 4 is more concrete. Repetition is often used in advertising, but it can be a double-edged sword. On the upside, repetition increases familiarity and reduces uncertainty. And according to the mere exposure effect, people tend to like things that are more familiar to them, even if they're not that keen on them initially. For example, maybe you've met someone you didn't like very much at first, and then over time, even if you didn't really have personal interactions with them, you started to like them. Or maybe you found yourself smiling at someone on the way to work in the morning, even though you'd never actually spoken to them. They were just familiar to you. Repeating product information has been shown to increase awareness, even if nothing new is said. However, too much repetition creates habituation. A consumer may no longer pay attention because of fatigue or boredom. This is referred to as advertising wear-out. At some point, boredom incurred begins to exceed the uncertainty reduced. So how do we avoid advertising wear-out? Well, limiting the exposure per repetition can help. For example, 15-second TV spots rather than 30. So can slightly varying the execution of the ads. For example, this approach was taken with the Got Milk ad campaign, where different celebrities were used to keep the campaign fresh, each with the familiar milk mustache. Marketers often make arguments to encourage consumers to buy their product. One-sided arguments are supporting arguments, where consumers are given good reasons for buying the product. Two-sided arguments provide both positive and negative information. So why would a marketer pay to advertise negative attributes about their brand? Well, to refute them. This is known as a refutational argument. An issue is raised and then it's dismissed. Skeptics may be more receptive to a balanced argument over a whitewash, and this approach may also increase source credibility by reducing any perceived reporting bias. For example, Volkswagen has used this approach in magazine ads, showing a picture of a Volkswagen Beetle stating that it was a lemon or a poor quality product. They went on to say it was a lemon because of a scratch on the glove compartment chrome strip, and that it was this close attention to detail that would ensure that no customer would ever get a lemon, only the plums. This approach is most effective with well-educated, not yet loyal audiences and skeptics. Avis, the rental car company, has used a refutational approach in a number of their advertising campaigns. They openly admit that they are the number 2 rental car company, but are quick to admit that that means that they try harder, and that means that consumers will benefit as a result. So, do Canadian consumers believe what advertisers say? According to a marketing study conducted by Ledger Marketing, only 4% agree that TV ads are truthful in describing products and services advertised, and 53% openly distrust them. So, should an argument draw explicit conclusions? For example, stating our brand is superior and that you should buy it? Or let consumers come to that conclusion themselves? According to the research, if the argument is hard to swallow, or consumers aren't motivated to draw their own conclusions, drawing conclusions for them is recommended. On the other hand, if the message is personally relevant, it may be best to let consumers draw their own conclusions. Consumers who make their own inferences tend to form stronger attitudes. Marketers sometimes compare brands in ads. This is known as comparative advertising. For example, you've probably seen ads with the Mac going head-to-head with the PC, or Pepsi going head-to-head with Coke in taste tests. However, if this approach is too confrontational, it may result in source derogation. The consumer may doubt the credibility of a biased presentation. Research also shows that an ad for a new product should not merely say it's better than the leading brand. For example, in a toothpaste study, a fictional brand of toothpaste called Spring was compared to Crest. Respondents were shown one of two ads. The first ad stated that Spring has the same fluoride as Crest. The second ad stated that Spring was preferred by Europeans in comparisons with Crest. The first ad resulted in a change of attitude toward the new product, while the second did not. Research also shows that ads for a new product should not reach too far by making comparisons to a superior competitor. For example, ads comparing the Nissan Altima to a Mercedes were not effective. The Mercedes was obviously superior. The way something is said can be as important as what is said. It may make you laugh, cry, scare you, or leave you wanting more. So should marketers appeal to the head with a rational appeal, or to the heart with an emotional appeal? Many companies use an emotional strategy when consumers find no difference amongst brands, especially brands in well-established mature categories, like cars and greeting cards. Ads soliciting for charitable donations often use emotional appeals. For example, a magazine ad contrasting the price of a $32 handbag to feeding someone for a week in a less fortunate country for just $4. It's harder for researchers to gauge recall of emotional ads because reactions are harder to articulate. On the other hand, recall for ad content tends to be better for thinking ads that use a rational appeal. For example, an ad for a new Lexus may use a rational appeal to generate awareness of its superior features, showing that they thought of everything, leaving no stone unturned. Emotional and rational appeals may be used for the same product category. For example, L'Oreal used an emotional appeal promising Parisian chic by associating the brand with sexy spokeswomen who reinforced the purchase with the slogan, "Because you're worth it." L'Oreal's marketing experts explained that you have to both inform, convince, but also seduce consumers and not just ram facts down their throats. Procter & Gamble took a different approach, using a rational appeal with the 10-day challenge for Pantene. Their ads promised hair that is 60% healthier, 70% less frizzy, 80% less prone to breakage, and 85% shinier. Barnardo's, the UK's largest children's charity, launched a provocative campaign using emotional appeals to solicit donations. The campaign featured a series of print ads with images of newborn babies. The first was shown with a silver spoon in his mouth, stating, "If only every child was born with a silver spoon." The others were quite graphic. One with a cockroach in its mouth, explaining that poverty could lead to a future of filth and squalor. Another with a syringe in its mouth, explaining that poverty could lead to a life of drug abuse. And another with a bottle of methanol alcohol in its mouth, warning about the link between poverty and alcoholism. The campaign aired just before Christmas and definitely stirred emotions. It was banned after a record number of complaints. Marketers have to be careful not to take emotional appeals too far. Shock advertising, or shockvertising, is another type of emotional appeal used in advertising. It deliberately, rather than inadvertently, startles and offends its audience by violating norms for social values and personal ideals. For example, a magazine ad for Ivana Bitch with the tagline, "A vodka with attitude," shown with the phallic image of a dill pickle standing up in a glass of ice. Another example is Levi's Unleash Your Beast campaign, which allows users to create and send to friends phallic monsters that pop out of the crotch of a pair of Levi's 501 jeans. German coffee maker Keffi released a series of TV commercials as part of their Wide Awake campaign that also shocked viewers. The visuals in the ad were used to stimulate the effect that the product has on the consumer. So, does sex sell? Well, according to the research, yes, but relevance matters. For example, sexual imagery paired with socket wrenches were shown to produce negative reactions from both sexes. However, when men were cognitively busy, in other words, not able to give full attention to the ad, they reacted more positively. In other studies, women felt less negative if the sex appeal was framed to promote commitment or a relationship. Nude models tend to generate tension among same-sex consumers. For example, female nudity in print ads generates tension in women consumers, while males are more positive. However, the reverse is shown to be true for males in other studies. Erotic ads are great at drawing attention, but strong sexual imagery may make consumers less likely to buy unless the product is related to sex. And consumers are less likely to remember the content of the ad. However, men and women tend to look at sex-themed ads differently. For example, in a study of 5 product categories, respondents were presented with 2 ads per category, one sexual and one not. Men tended to focus on the women and ignore the text, while women read the text first. Overall, men liked the sexual ads more, liked the products advertised more, and were more likely to buy them. On the other hand, women scored less on all 3 criteria. Sexual appeals are widely used. For example, a talking dartboard with a picture of a woman with a target on each of her breasts saying, "Hit the target and I squeal with delight." Other comments include, "Every man can score with this, babe." It's not a surprise that this product was eventually banned from store shelves. Carl's Jr. has a history of using scantily clad swimsuit models and celebrities like Paris Hilton to promote their burgers. And Kraft used half-naked men to promote their Zesty line of salad dressings. Humorous appeals are also often used by marketers. However, humor varies by culture. For example, Canada and the UK use more puns and sarcasm than the United States. A pun is a joke playing on the different possible meanings of a word, or that they sound alike but have different meanings. For example, "I tinted my hair today. It was the highlight of my day." Or some clockmakers are normal, but others are a little cuckoo. Humorous ads are great for getting attention. They are also a source of distraction, which helps prevent consumers from making counter-arguments. Humorous ads tend to work quite well when they violate expectations, as long as they're not offensive. For example, this magazine ad for Pepsi uses humor to break through the clutter, and it certainly violates expectations with the image of the lime peeing into a glass of pop from the top of a Pepsi bottle. While some may find this ad humorous, others may find it offensive. Fear appeals emphasize the negative consequences that could occur unless the consumer changes their behavior. This appeal is common in social marketing. For example, to promote responsible drinking or to encourage people to stop smoking. It is sometimes referred to as a slice of death advertising, playing on the term slice of life advertising, as it often appeals to the anxiety that we have about our careers or our love lives. For example, in a contact cold medicine ad, a worker is seen wading her way through a rainstorm, adding, "No work, no pay," as the headline in the ad. This approach was used after a study with 800 consumers that indicated people feel anxiety about missing work due to illness. Fear appeals are most effective when the threat is moderate and works best when the consumer is already afraid of the problem. There's a solution, otherwise the consumer may tune it out, and the source is highly credible. Stronger threats are not always the most persuasive. If the fear is too great, the audience may deny the existence of the threat to rationalize. For example, in raising awareness of AIDS in sexually active youth, many in affluent neighborhoods don't believe that people like them will be exposed to the virus, perhaps because the fear is too great. Advertisers are like storytellers. They use literary elements, allegories, metaphors, similes, and resonance. An allegory is a story about an abstract trait or concept. It's often personified as a person, an animal, or a vegetable. For example, the story of the Green Giant. Kids are told that if you eat your beans, you'll be big and strong like the Green Giant. A metaphor describes two dissimilar objects in a close relationship. For example, Tony the Tiger is strength, or Tropicana orange juice is your daily ray of sunshine, or perhaps images of cigarettes loaded into a gun to reinforce that smoking kills. Similes compare two objects. For example, the Chevy Silverado is like a rock. Resonance is a play on words using pictures. Resonance is frequently used in advertising. For example, Toyota ran an ad with a headline that said, "Our lifetime guarantee may come as a shock," alongside a picture of a man holding a shock absorber. In another example, Bucks Filter Cigarettes ran an ad with a headline that said, "Heard of these?" alongside a picture of a cigarette pack with a picture of a stag or a male deer. Pepsi ran an ad with a headline that said, "This year, hit the beach topless," alongside a picture of a Pepsi bottle cap lying on the sand. There are lots of examples of resonance in advertising. Just as a story can be told in pictures or words, the way an audience is addressed can make a difference. Commercials may seem more like a lecture or more like a drama. A lecture is like a speech in which the source speaks directly to the audience. The source attempts to persuade the audience, and cognitive responses may occur like counter-arguments. A drama is a story that draws viewers into the action. Characters interact with each other in an imaginary setting and indirectly address the audience. It's similar to a play or a movie. So what's more important? What's said, or how it's said and by whom? The answer is that it really depends on the consumer's level of involvement. The elaboration likelihood model, or ELM, assumes that once a consumer receives a message, they begin to process it. The consumer's level of involvement will determine which aspects of the communications are processed. The ELM builds on the hierarchy of effects discussed in Chapter 7. For example, in high involvement processing, consumers take the central route and focus on the steak or the meat of the message. The consumer likely engages in the traditional hierarchy of effects, or the standard learning hierarchy. Beliefs are carefully formed by accumulating knowledge. They're then evaluated, and feelings are formed. This then guides the consumer's behavior. For example, an expectant mother may hear a radio ad warning about drinking while pregnant. She engages in high involvement processing because this is an important issue to her. Taking the central route, she carefully listens to the message. She then evaluates the argument, perhaps saying to herself, "She's right. I should stop drinking." Or maybe, "That's baloney. My mom drank when she was pregnant with me, and I turned out fine. From there, she will either continue drinking or decide to stop. In low involvement processing, consumers tend to take the peripheral route, focusing on the sizzle or the peripheral elements in the ad. Stimuli associated with the product become more important. For example, the product's sexy packaging, the popularity of the spokesperson, or the pleasant shopping environment. The consumer likely engages in the low involvement hierarchy, acting on the basis of limited knowledge and forming an evaluation afterwards. Which of these ads do you think is using the central route? Which is using the peripheral route? The ad on the left is more visual, focusing on the peripheral aspects of the product, the wonderful scents that are available, while the ad on the right focuses more on the arguments for using the product, how it cleans your whole house and everything in it. A number of studies have been done to prove the elaboration likelihood model. In one study, a fictitious new brand of low-alcohol beer called Break was tested. 3 variables were manipulated: the consumer's level of involvement, the strength of the arguments presented to the consumer, and the characteristics of the source of the message. Involvement was manipulated by giving one group a free beer and telling them that the new beer would be available in the local market to simulate high involvement. The other group was not given a gift and was told that the beer would be available in a distant market to simulate low involvement. The strength of the argument was manipulated by telling one group that the beer contains half the alcohol of regular beers and therefore has less calories, to simulate a strong argument. The other group was told it was just as good as other beers, to simulate a weak argument. The source characteristics were manipulated by presenting more attractive models in the ads to one group to simulate higher source attractiveness. The other group was shown ads with less attractive models to simulate lower source attractiveness. The results of the study confirmed the elaboration likelihood model. The high involvement subjects had more thoughts about the new beer and were more influenced by powerful arguments, while the lower involvement group was more influenced by the characteristics of the source. This concludes Chapter 8.